What Panda here is citing is basically the Austrian business cycle, which says that if the Fed is in charge of setting rates, at some point it will set rates below the natural point of interest, right? And if they do that, it'll create an artificial boom, and that boom will inevitably result in a bust. The problem with this theory is that it's dog shit and there's no empirical evidence for it whatsoever at all.
Oh, wait.
He was bringing up this point. The dollar has lost 97% of its value. Who cares? The thing that matters is not the nominal value of the dollar. Really what matters is time prices, is how much time the average worker has to work to afford a given thing. Time prices have continued to fall dramatically for most everything in the economy. In developed countries at least. I just have a question for Panda, okay? I'm just super curious. Do you know what the loanable funds market is, buddy?
The loanable funds market,
I
don't know, actually don't know what that specific thing is.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so, here's something interesting, by the way. Just so you know, the actual point of quantitative easing is that it shifts the loanable funds market to the right. It shifts the supply of loanable funds market, which is basically the money that can be lent out in the economy, to the right, okay? Do you have any idea what that would do to the interest rate?
Would that increase the interest rate?
That would decrease the interest rate, because... So Sondsol and one of my viewers, who's a mutual viewer with Sondsol, had a debate with a Boy, which is kind of insane, because Gideox is in no way prepared to debate a Boy and should not be doing that. But eventually, I didn't get to talk to Boy, unfortunately, despite how much I love Boy. The debate continued, and eventually I did hop in. I did get to talk to Sondsol and Panda, of course, for a little bit until I went back to editing. Anyway, this is some debate.
And, the fucking, what is it, the Austrian School of Economics with their praxeology?
Sondsol really
Boy, do you want to talk about economics?
yeah, sure, but I just
Here's basically what we should do. Abolish all central banks, cut most taxes, abolish every single cent of welfare program, abolish most regulatory agencies. Basically, I want what Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek advocated for in terms of economics. Uncle Sam has caused a boom-bust cycle enforcing the petrodollar, and recently Russia and China and BRICS have had to liberate some of the global south countries from Uncle Sam's control because he's enforced this.
They had to liberate the global south countries from Uncle Sam's control because of Uncle Sam's endless inflation.
Because Wall Street pays them too. No, we need to go to genuine free markets based on mutual agreement and prosperity, and that'll lead to economic growth and get rid of the boom-bust nonsense.
That doesn't really make any sense. I mean, I think like we had boom-bust cycles before we had central banks, right? So
no, the boom. Have you ever read any Austrian theory?
I've definitely read.
So we did have boom-bust cycles before central banks. That's objectively true. And in some senses, they were worse. Like it seems like the central bank has been able to have less recessions and dampen the effect of recessions when they happen. What Panda here is citing is basically the Austrian business cycle, which says that if the Fed sets rates, if the Fed is in charge of setting rates, at some point it will set rates below the natural point of interest, right? Or natural rate of interest. Natural rate of interest is just what the interest rate should be if the free market decides it and not the centralized federal bank, right? And if they do that, it'll create an artificial boom, and that boom will inevitably result in a bust. The problem with this theory is that it's dog shit and there's no empirical evidence for it whatsoever at all. Basically, any study is going to show you that some version of the Keynesian business cycle theory, which is based on the so-called animal spirits, is based on changes in investment, is just a better theory. There's data for this in regards to how well Keynesian models versus Austrian models perform. Fuck, wait, that's not what I want. Where's the here it is. And there's data for this as well in the plucking model stuff. So basically, this is the natural rate model, the one that Panda is suggesting. Basically, under this theory, the size of the boom should predict the recession, right? Versus the more Keynesian, it's not strictly Keynesian, really this is Friedman. The plucking model theory, the size of the recession should predict how fast the growth is afterwards. The support for the evidence shows the plucking model is a lot better than the natural rate model. Yeah, the R squared here is not meaningful at all. We can make this bigger. So it's not a very good theory. There's no real empirical evidence for it. This is another another study. You can look. They have the Austrian business cycle here. We read this whole study. Basically, it found that the post-Keynesian business cycle was better, like all the time. For most of the models they ran, the Austrian business cycle model was not even like statistically significant. Like, yeah, this is the Keynesian model. This is the Austrian model. But the Austrians' response to this is just rejecting empirical evidence. They just say empirics is all made up and fucking theory is better.
I read some Austrian theory in my day.
Well, to my understanding, the way Austrians see it is because the Federal Reserve prints more money than there is in the population. This necessarily leads to inflation, which leads to overspending, which leads to a boom-bust cycle in the business cycle.
Well, again, the Federal Reserve has only existed since 1913, and the Great Moderation, in terms of a strong-handed Fed, has only existed for the last 40 or 50 years, right? So we would have to, by that model, we'd have to explain why there were so many recessions and so many banking crises and so many problems with the economy, and not just problems, but there was a much more volatile economic state of output before the central bank than after. Like, that theory doesn't account for that information.
Well, okay, I thought, and I've read articles from or ancient pamphlets from Mises and Hayek, where basically the outline is, so the Keynesian theory is when you spend money, the consumers will give the money to businesses, which is economic growth. But the inverse is true. When you give money, they'll spend it, but then they won't, because of the inflation, they won't have enough money for future products, which leads to a crash after the initial boom, and then that crash has to be supplied with more government spending ad infinitum, right? I thought this was a general theory. Or
Yeah, I'm sure you have a better understanding. I mean, if you're an Austrian, you probably have a better understanding of like what the claims are of Austrian theory, right? But I'm just
I don't think he does. Most Austrians support the theory that I just showed you. I don't think Panda even knows about this theory.
If the claim is that we should get rid of central bank,
I don't think he knows much about R stars or natural rates. I think
it's because the federal government and the Federal Reserve, I guess the Federal Reserve really is like the reason why we have boom and bust cycles. You'd have to explain why before the Federal Reserve existed, we had more boom and bust cycles and they were worse, right?
Well, it's not just the boom, that's just one of many problems. Another problem is inflation. Okay. Another problem is distortion of interest rates because it's always higher low than the natural demand rate would be. And there are so many other problems with this. Debt, right? The dollar has lost 97% of its value compared to where it originally was. There's no.
I pre-watched most of this. I don't think I think I probably stopped it somewhere in this part.
Oh wait,
he keeps bringing up this point. The dollar has lost 97% of its value. Who cares? The thing that matters is not the nominal value of the dollar. First of all, it's 97% over its entire existence, and also, dollar lost 97% of value. If you look at this chart, right? The times where the dollar appreciated, it got more purchasing power, were not good times, right? Like, like this is you see how the dollar got more powerful here, and this is the Great Depression. We shouldn't really want the dollar to get more powerful. There's negative side effects to it. There is a such thing as a deflationary spiral, which is not good. But also, the bigger point is, Conaway mentioned this, is that we could have a system where the dollar slowly loses value, but that enables economic growth, so wages also grow. Like, the nominal value of the dollar doesn't matter at all. Really what matters is time prices, is how much time the average worker has to work to afford a given thing. Time prices have continued to fall dramatically for most everything in the economy, in developed countries at least.
I mean, even leftists agree the Federal Reserve is bad. The difference is they want to transition to a socialist based economy without central banking currency, right? They want a classless, stateless. I don't agree with that. I believe we should just get rid of the government and economics. I don't agree with the socialist idea of like stateless or classless.
I mean, I guess so. I don't really. I mean, for the most part, I think I think that leftists, well, it depends on the kind of leftists you're talking to, obviously. People left of center are generally not
Well, do you
in
know who
favor
Ben Norton is?
I don't know who Ben Norton is. I'm not sure if he's a representative of the whole left, but I mean, if we,
I don't know.
think
So
of...
he's a progressive.
Yeah.
He hosts the Geopolitical Economy Report, and basically he was saying that he believes, so he is a communist, and he advocates for policies where he basically wants to working class own means of production, but he believes the problem with federal reserves is that they basically lead to
I'm not surprised that some
I
people
don't think
on
the
the
problem
left
is
who
capitalism. I think the problem is
disagree.
communism. I think the problem is fascism, not capitalism.
I'm not surprised that there's some people on the left who would be against the Federal Reserve, but there's a lot of people on the right who are in favor of the Federal Reserve, right? So
This is just horseshoe theory. Like, there's anti-establishment. That's why people I talk to, like Casey and NRK, are also like anti-Fed. Sorry if they're here, but I'm right.
it's just a matter of who's actually representative, right? Like, generally speaking, the leftists are not in favor of
Panda,
getting rid
you
of the
have to
Federal
let-
Reserve.
Casey won't even admit that corporate taxes reduce workers' wages, so I don't take anything he says seriously on economics.
He'll respond. When you say something, you have to let him respond.
Can I
Right,
think
people
of-
left of center aren't, I don't think, generally in favor of getting rid of the Fed, but we've already talked. I mean, you're unwilling to address the empirics of your claim. It seems like if you
Well,
want to talk about welfare,
I gave you a statistic of 97% of the value of the dollar originally has been lost.
well, that doesn't do anything to counter the claim of whether or not there have been more and worse boom bust cycles before the
No,
Federal
I
Reserve.
said that's one problem. There are many problems with the Federal Reserve. Boom bust is one of them. But even
All right,
if
so we're
boom bust
giving
had
up on that
nothing-
one problem, then we're not going to
No,
address that one
let's just-
problem.
You also keep saying this is a problem. It's not a problem. It's a trade-off. You could maybe argue that the trade-off is negative, but it's not like a... Well, I guess you could say the problem is the negative trade-off, but you should also be willing to discuss the positive trade-offs of that.
have to focus on it. We can focus
Okay.
on it another time because it's not an issue I'm as well read about compared to the other ones. I've heard it,
Okay.
it's just I'm not as well read about. But I do know for a fact inflation has, by definition, increased when you increase the currency supply. And I know for a fact that Wall Street, under the Federal Reserve, has increased inflation since the dollar.
Yeah, but well, you'd have to. You're begging the question, right? So obviously, it could be the case that increased inflation is actually a good thing, and it's not necessarily the case that increased money printing causes inflation, right? So
Well,
those are two facts that have not been historically
Inflation
demonstrated.
can be a good thing, but only in limited degrees, right? Most inflation is almost always worse than deflation, but there's some, when it comes to population growth, there's some exceptions to the rule. But there's a difference between a little bit of inflation or a healthy rate of inflation and losing 97% of that. Clearly, you can see it's gone way too far, and I don't think any honest
I don't think
actor
so.
with more than two brain cells to rub together can look at that situation. Unless, like,
Well, I don't think that unless we're going to allege some sort of globally coordinated conspiracy of like every mainstream economist who holds.
I also think there clearly were a lot of positive trade-offs from like the deficit spending, the COVID spending that we did. I think those trade-offs are worth it, and I'm pretty sure I have more than two brain cells. I think so, at least.
I don't care what economists say. I care about what facts say.
Okay,
You haven't
but
said
you're
a single
saying
fact.
unless
You've only been referencing individuals that you're taking their
Right.
word for it.
Well, you're saying like if unless you don't have two brain cells to rub together. So it's like we have to assume two things, or we have to assume one of two things. Either there's a global coordinated conspiracy, or every economist on the planet.
Not every economist. I just
essentially
listed Mises and Hayek were both against central banking.
Panda, there's no mainstream. And when I say mainstream, I mean like 95% of economists who work in policy would say
We
central
take them
banks are probably
seriously.
good, and the idea of a lower bound inflation target.
I don't
is
care what
probably
economists say. Let's focus on facts.
good. Okay, if you don't care what economists say, I don't know why you're
How
bringing
about
up
we
Mises.
focus on
then.
what facts of reality say? How about we focus
Okay,
on that?
so if we're not going to focus on the fact, if we're not going to focus.
They're going to fight Destiny over neoliberal new king. I mean, if I ever talk to Destiny, it'd probably not be about that, even though like I don't know what we were talking about, but if I ever talk to Destiny, I would not waste it on neo-Keynesianism.
Focus on economists, then I don't know why you're bringing up Mises all the time. Now,
Because Mises
when it comes to
had
the fact of the reality, you just keep repeating the statement. Oh well, we lost 97% of our dollars value over time. But I would wager that what most people would prefer, like if you presented them
I
two
don't care what
scenarios,
most
Blue pill out January 7th.
right?
So let's
Well,
focus on.
hold on, King. I'm trying to
I don't care what
illustrate
most
the
people.
point.
Do you care
It's okay. You have no facts to back your point up. So
Hold on, I'm
listen.
going to put
Okay,
a quick
now,
pause because Panda can't control himself. Panda, you are projecting this entire conversation so far. You say you want to focus on facts. When he asks you about the empirics, you drop that point and you
I said
"Hold on, shut
97% of the dollar has
I'm
lost
going to,
inflation.
don't you
Doesn't
dare
count.
fucking speak over me right now. You have no fucking right. Shut the fuck up. You said
Sondsol
that you
is-
want to drop
I
the
just went to-
empirical fucking argument about the boom bust cycle. You say, well, I don't care about that. That's only one part. Here's this guy, Heidegger, and he says this. And then Econoboy says, well, I don't know why would we ignore, all of these other, like mainstream. Well, I don't care what economists say. I care about facts. Now here, again, I'm going to relay out once again for the 45th time, this one guy's opinion on something. Do you recognize that you are projecting the exact thing that you keep on criticizing everybody else in the fucking world for, except for the retards that you watch on fucking Twitch, okay? You're
True.
engaging in the exact same thing. You're engaging
But not me. I'm not one of the. I mean, he does watch me on Twitch, but I'm not a retard. I'm not, guys. I'm not. I
the
swear.
exact
I swear.
same fucking
I
thing.
swear.
Let Econoboy fucking respond.
I don't want to appeal to authority. I'm just saying it doesn't
No,
matter.
it's not appealing to authority. You're saying that he can't appeal to literally any like broad consensus on like economics from the worldwide fucking like scholarly study of the economy. He's not allowed to reference them.
There's a difference between
No,
studies and
shut
polls.
up. But the second that he tries to push back, you say, I don't want to fucking hear about that. What I want to hear about is facts. Here's what Heidegger said about this theoretical thing. You're not giving any facts. Bring a fucking statistic or never say another fucking person's name again.
And then the only statistic he has is the dollar lost 97% of its value. He does not understand the trade-offs behind it. I know he doesn't understand the trade-offs behind it because I literally joined the call later and I asked him, do you know what the loanable funds market is? And he said no. So he clearly doesn't know the trade-offs through this. Like inflation decreases the real interest rate, which can increase growth. Like that's it. Like we're talking about quantitative easing at the time. It's like, well, this quantitative easing can cause inflation, but also it pushed the interest rate down. So like, you know, it shifted the loanable funds to the right, which is what we're trying to do when there's a low growth period.
97% of the value of the dollar has been lost. That's a statistical fact.
Okay, cool.
King,
Now it's his
you
turn.
didn't let me finish my point, right? So, number one, what you just referenced isn't a study, right? So there's a statistic, the value of the dollar over time. We can see that one unit of currency, $1.
Inflation isn't good. Inflation isn't always good. It's not always bad either. There are trade-offs to it, and those trade-offs are on the margin.
You know, one single dollar of currency, the purchasing power of that dollar, that single dollar has gone down over time. That's not a contested fact. Nobody with two brain cells to rub together would contest that fact, right?
I'm saying it's a bad
I was
thing.
trying to illustrate exactly, right? So I'm trying to illustrate why it's not necessarily a bad thing. Is
Well, then you'd be wrong.
I don't think we would care necessarily about the purchasing power of a single dollar. We would care about the purchasing power of individuals, right?
Yes.
And so if we could create a system, which is essentially what we've done in the last 40 or 50 years, and it's not perfect, obviously. Like I would advocate for a radical transformation of our welfare state. You would just advocate for getting rid of it and our ownership, productive apparatus, right? But if we could create a scenario where the value of a single dollar goes down, but the amount of dollars that people have available to them goes up, then that's probably not a worse scenario because the purchasing power of individuals goes up over time.
That proves you don't know what you're
don't go up over time.
Because
right?
if you give people more money, but that money is worth less, that creates more instability. Because sure, people might have more money in the short term, but if long term it leads to more inflation, that's going to lead to spending, inflation.
Well,
inflation.
we're not allowed to talk. We're not allowed to talk about that though, because you said you don't want to talk about the empirics of whether or not money printing causes inflation, and you don't want to talk about the empirics of whether or not central banks cause recessions. Right? Well, I've already established the idea that money printing does not necessarily lead to inflation.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't. Okay, so
Yes, it does.
if we
Like,
look
I know
at
for a fact
Finish,
if you have
Panda.
$5
If you
in
want to
income-
fucking like ever
So he doesn't understand the MMT school. I kind of would it's a good
have any
hypothetical here.
respect, like anyone respect you in your entire fucking life, you're gonna have to listen to what they say as well.
well,
I do.
Here's an example. Okay, Panda.
I disrespect.
You're just not
here's a
listening to the
question.
fucking question.
I
Or-
disrespect you.
Oh,
Panda,
then why the fuck
well,
are you in my fucking Discord? Get
Panda,
the fuck out.
just listen. Hold on, Panda. If I printed $1 trillion worth of currency and then buried it in my backyard, does that cause inflation?
No, but that's never what happens. So
All right. So we've established the idea that just printing money doesn't cause inflation, right? You can't just print money and cause inflation, right?
if you get print money and give it to people,
Okay, right. So you have to circulate that currency, right? It has to circulate in order to cause.
You could also argue like if money printing directly depreciates the dollar low, this guy's a bad masturbator. It doesn't, again, analyze this hypothetical. If you print $1 trillion and bury it in your backyard, does that cause inflation? Probably not. You could also do another hypothetical. If you print $1 trillion and people spend it on Fortnite V-Bucks, that's probably not going to be that inflationary because the supply of Fortnite V-Bucks is infinite. In the long run, you're correct. In the long run, it will depreciate. It will depreciate because that money will circulate. But again, if that money isn't circulating, then it doesn't cause inflation. Where's my notes on time prices, bro? What really matters is time prices, and there's good research that shows a lot of time prices have fallen. Time prices, how many hours people must work on average to acquire various goods, have fallen. The number of hours an average U.S. blue-collar worker would have to work to afford a basket of 35 consumer goods fell by 72% between 1979 and 2019. And then this is the percentage of income spent on necessities. They've also fallen from like the 1950s 20% to just 13.5% now. I should Schrodinger dollars true. I had more graphs too that show the time price of like a lot of like specifically groceries. Time prices for groceries have fallen quite significantly over the past 20 years even.
Inflation. Fair enough.
Yeah, but nobody contests
Okay.
that. That's what people
So-
mean when I say money printing.
okay.
Money printing is
So
never just buried in
the speed at which, well, sometimes it is, right?
Well, it's never.
The equivalent of burying your money in the backyard might be putting it in savings, right? You're not
True.
circulating that money. It's not causing any sort of consumption-based inflation when you save money.
No, but that savings is going to
Right.
go to future spending. It might not be spent now, but in the future it's going to be spent.
Well, okay, for instance, we could test this theory out in Japan. This is what they said for a long time in Japan. They said, well, in Japan, because of the aging population and because of all the aggregate savings of people and all these people retiring, it'll cause inflation. That everyone's going to start spending their savings, and all of a sudden inflation's going to happen in Japan. That didn't happen, right? That didn't come online. It didn't happen in South Korea where the same thing's happening either. It's not happening in China where the same thing's happening. So we have to, our analysis has to be a little bit more.
I mean, we're in an excess reserve system, but yeah, you're right. Or ample reserve system, but yeah, it will get fractional reserve still.
Complex than just money printing causes inflation. That just doesn't seem to be the case, historically speaking. Now, it's not that money, like for instance, if I were to print $1 trillion, not $1 trillion, because clearly the upper bound's higher than that. If I were to print $5 trillion, right, and distribute it amongst various people, it's obviously the case that that's going to cause some level of inflation. But the Austrians take this very like one-to-one, view where it's like, oh yeah, the reason we have inflation is because of money printing. But you can have inflation without money printing, and you can have money printing without inflation. So we have to think more critically about how inflation.
Well, it's very hard for there to be inflation without money printing unless there's a decrease, or what do you say? Unless there's something with the population rates or something like that, or maybe immigration could affect that. But generally speaking, like if you don't have much money printing, there's very little inflation.
There's tons of ways you could have inflation without.
Maybe theoretically, but not in practice.
Yes, in practice. I mean, look, we had a global pandemic where we did print a lot of money, and there's some you could contest whether what proportion of inflation exists because of the money printing or because of the global supply chain problems. But nobody contests that the global supply chain problems cause some level of inflation. Like obviously, when we have like
but you're dealing with
construction of supply chains.
I don't disagree, but you have to focus on the forest, not the trees. You can say an individual factor. We have to focus on what the vast majority cause. If you focus on every little nook and cranny, you're not going to focus on what the real issue is. So sure, maybe 20% of inflation prices in America after the pandemic had to do with lockdowns.
Well, for instance, the money supply increased by about 30% because of the quantitative easing on account of COVID. But we only had 9% inflation. So how does that work, King?
Some of that had to do with the fact that people had to buy more essential goods during COVID. Some of that had to do with other things. I'm not saying it's simplistic, but what I'm saying is it's undoubtable the $7 trillion the Biden administration pumped, and for that matter, the trillions Trump pumped into the economy were both pretty bad.
At least he mentions Trump. It's just because he's anti-establishment, though. So like,
in fact, what we should have done, we shouldn't have done any lockdowns. We should not have done any of that. We should not have done nice. We could have given people maybe. I would have been fine with like some PPP loans to keep businesses afloat, and maybe some social distancing local. But it's clear the government was way too heavy-handed, and if we didn't have a Federal Reserve, this problem wouldn't have been exacerbated to the level it did. I don't think that's even debatable. You can say inflation is sometimes a good thing. Mm-hmm. I don't disagree; it's sometimes a good thing. But again, 97% is way too far for me.
Well, my only argument is that whilst we've had
97%, not over COVID, over the entirety of the dollar's existence, right? But like also again, I don't care at all about the nominal value of the dollar. Maybe the nominal value of the dollar has gone down 97%. You know what hasn't? Or actually, time prices have probably gone down by more than 97%. Time prices going down is a good thing. Time prices is what matters, not the nominal value of the dollar.
This sort of level of inflation over time, after getting rid of the gold standard, we've had wage growth that far outpaces inflation for a consistent enough period of time that people's standards of living has increased to a significant degree, right? Well, I'm just saying the gold standard, when we got rid of the gold standard, we ended up having a period of inflation during the 70s, the stagflation of the 70s. But then when we had a strong central bank, the inflation comes down significantly. But even throughout all that period, we've had, we're comparing our worlds, right? So like in my world, which is the world we live in today, obviously I would change a lot of things about our policy, but the fundamental view of having a central bank that controls basically inflation in part through interest rates would remain around. And in that world that we live in, we've had consistently stable and low inflation, and we've had wages increasing beyond inflation, which is to say that people are better off on an individual basis.
You're simply wrong. Every single action the Federal Reserve has done since its inception has statistically increased inflation significantly higher than if we transition to a free banking system, and there's no way you can contest that honestly.
Well, I'm not aware of many empirical examples of free banking, so I'm not sure how you could make such a strong claim about the efficacy of free banking.
There actually were a couple of studies about free banking in Scotland, but I know for a fact in the free banking system there wouldn't be political pressure to give Wall Street all this money, and the neoliberals.
And now we're doing the anti-establishment like corruption thing. There wouldn't be political pressure to give all the billionaires to Wall Street so much money with the quantitative easing to inflate asset prices. To
fascists in the deep state wouldn't have so much cronyism because you basically have free association.
Cronyism. That's what. Yeah.
Corrupt incentives under a free banking system. Like
we had central for I don't know how long for 30 years or something like that. We had central banking without quantitative easing. So if your criticism is of
I'm against all central banking
money and creating swaps.
Central banking, including I'm against, even if it was pinned to the gold standard and there was a central bank, I would still be against that. I'm against all central banking.
I understand. Well, you're against central banking. Well, I have to go in a minute, but I don't think you have a strong case against central banking. If you want, we can talk about welfare.
97% inflation rate.
Well, you keep repeating that, but you're not really addressing the empirical reality that people are actually better off because their wages are increasing beyond the inflation rate.
The wages have not
compared.
Well, first of all, wages are not higher wages is not necessarily a good thing. It can be, but again, too much stimulus.
I have a hard time thinking of an example where higher wages is a bad thing. Maybe if they're a drug addict or something.
The economy that can lead to inflation, but again.
That's not wages. That's stimulus. Those are two different things, right?
There's no reason for there to be a Federal Reserve when we know for a fact.
I mean, there is such a thing, theoretically at least, as a wage price spiral, but
It's just given trillions to Wall Street. None of it has served the American people. It's led to, again, 97% devaluation. I mean, I don't think you can even be an honest actor and not admit this. But if you want to disagree,
again, if you want to claim that every single economist, across the whole fucking world, basically is being dishonest when they say we believe in central banking, we believe in a lower bound inflation target that's controlled by a central bank. And when I say every economist, I mean 95% of economists. If you think 95% of economists in the world are just being like liars when they say that this is a good thing, then that's, I mean, I alleged in the beginning that's a conspiratorial view. You said, no, that's not a conspiracy. I'm not claiming a conspiracy.
You can say someone's bad faith, not a conspiracy. Like. Somebody can be a bad faith actor and not work for somebody. People have...
But 95% of economists all, I mean, I guess maybe they wouldn't all have to be organized. They could all independently decide to be bad faith. Maybe. But like, yeah, this is obviously conspiratorial.
Political agendas all the time. Again, it doesn't matter what an individual says. What matters is what's moral. What matters is what's just, and what matters is the facts on the ground.
Well, sure. I mean, I don't think there's anything immoral about creating a central banking system. Obviously, the purpose of it.
You don't believe the cronyism. You don't believe the trillions, not just inflation. How much of it's gone to this nonsense? You don't believe that's immoral?
Well, I mean, I think no. I mean, it's a matter of intentions and effects, I guess, right? Like, I don't think that Ben Bernanke, when he started the quantitative easing, I don't think that
feel like that's trying to rush in China, and I wish we didn't have that. I'm against it.
I don't think in Ben Bernanke's head he was saying, oh, I'm going to do quantitative easing because I want fat cats on Wall Street to make trillions of dollars or something like that. Now, we can disagree with the policy, but I don't think every time somebody implements a policy, they're like some corrupt individual. Sometimes they're just wrong, right? Like, I'm critical of quantitative easing myself, but it seems weird to be like, oh, yeah, no, it's just...
I mean, yeah, there are exceptions to the rule. There are some good faith actors, but they deny the level of corruption. Again, it's like there are some redeeming qualities.
Something's not corrupt.
He has no evidence for this corruption at all, by the way. Me and Sondsol, and I think even after I left, Sondsol pressed him on it even more. Tried to press him on this corruption point, and the only thing that he could come up with is that Janet Yellen was given money, and like I think $7 million in total in speaker fees after she left the Federal Reserve, which is not evidence at all. It's just evidence that she's a good economist. Yeah, and you could maybe say it's evidence of the like revolving door in government, right? That people move between the private and public sector. What's also, you should take note that like the Fed operates as only like a quasi government institution. Like it's not full on part of the government. Its head is like appointed by the president. There are also some parts of the Fed that are appointed by private banks, right? Like private banks have some control over the local Federal Reserve institutions, right? What are they called? The charter banks, I think. Yeah, it's only a quasi government institution. What's up, Devi, Ganpat, Shiv?
If the intent is genuine, right? Like
some individuals have genuine intent and some don't. I can't read people's minds. It doesn't matter.
Well, sure. I'm talking about Ben Bernanke, the head of the U.S.
Federal Reserve. I don't know enough about Ben Bernanke.
Quantitative easing starting.
I don't know that much about his biography. He could be an honest actor. He could not be.
Well, let's take Ben Bernanke and
Janet Yellen is disgusting and a bad economist. True.
And Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell, who
I think Jerome
oversaw
Powell
the entire quantitative easing
are pretty
program.
bad. I believe they gave a lot of money to Wall Street and quantitative easing schemes. I believe they're pretty corrupt.
I don't have any reason to believe that, but I think you're saying they're corrupt because they did a thing you disagree with. It sounds like.
I'm saying it because the thing they disagreed with, it helped a specific cronyist interest.
Yeah, but you argued for PPE loans, which help businesses and not people, right? So you have to make the argument that...
I don't know. I don't know enough about PPP loans, but from what I've read about the subject, they did help keep small businesses afloat, which probably was a good thing for minimizing inflation given the lockdowns.
Right. And so someone like Janet Yellen or Jerome Powell or Ben Bernanke would say that there's some utilitarian purpose for putting money, basically swapping money out of the system, or swapping assets out of the system and money into the system for economic purpose. They wouldn't say like they're genuine. I think my view would be that their genuine opinion would just be, oh yeah, we thought that this would help the economy, basically.
Well, fair enough. But then at that point, how do you determine when somebody's being honest about their intentions and when somebody's lying about their intentions in order to hide their true intentions?
I mean, you'd have to engage in a pretty thorough investigation, I assume.
I would say the burden is on Panda to prove that they are dishonest. Destiny loves genocide. True.
I haven't heard of any evidence. I mean, there have been government scandals before about people being corrupt. I just haven't heard that with the U.S. Federal Reserve. Like, if you told me, like Bob Menendez seems he's about to go to prison for taking bribes, right? It's like, well, there you go. That guy was corrupt. He was using his position to enrich himself and
you got on a real stream. My bad.
Get people out of trouble who shouldn't have been out of trouble. Seems corrupt to me. Investigation was done. He's going to jail, right? I mean, that seems like pretty good process for determining someone's good or bad faith and whether they're corrupt or not.
Yeah, but somebody doesn't have to be convicted to be. There's a difference between violating corruption laws and just the general political or ethical idea of corruption, right? Somebody can have dual interests and at the same time not necessarily be breaking the law. I don't know.
I don't see. There's no use saying they're corrupt though. You're not.
Don't
you're
matter.
Not,
can I just ask one final question because I think you got to wrap this out. Just one final question.
Yeah.
This is just going to be a yes or no because I don't want to debate it too long. The yes or no. Do you believe the proposition that if we had free banking instead of a Federal Reserve, we'd have a statistically lower rate of inflation over time? Yes or no?
I guess I don't know. I mean, you're when you say free banking, you mean basically just get rid of all government influence over interest rates?
Yeah, so basically move to sort of an Austrian theory free market system.
That is why October 7th happened. He was there. He was with Hamas. That's what he just does the pro-Israel shit to cover for it.
There's a caveat to my answer. I would say that over a long period of time, the amount of price increase would probably be lower. But the caveat to that is that I think we would see a similar situation that we saw before we had the central bank, which was whilst the aggregate level of the dollar's purchasing power remained fairly stable, you had huge swings of inflation and deflation all the time. So the actual volatility of the value of the dollar would go up, and that's not good for business, right?
Well,
so that's why
the
I would
reason I would
generally be
disagree
in
with that,
support of,
if you want to jigger with that, is because before we had the Federal Reserve, we didn't have free banking. But another thing we had, which I believe led to some of the crisis crashes, were high tariff rates. I believe the problem was the high tariff rates led to too little foreign trade, and too little foreign trade didn't lead to enough stability in the markets. I don't believe there was necessarily a problem with the currency as much as it was, the government trying to protect native industry.
Yeah, I mean, maybe maybe a country will try out free banking and it'll work out pretty well. But I don't know. Doesn't seem to be super empirically validated, the idea of free banking. So I'd be pretty skeptical of it until we get some good evidence.
I mean, if that's all you have to say, is Sondsol still there?
Oh, I'm still here, buddy.
Not the list.
Okay,
So we're gonna do a quick debate review about how that conversation just went. Once Econoboy leaves. By the way, Econoboy, how's it going?
It's going all right. We're about to kick off Live and Learn episode, whatever episode we're on.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, this was a so that was interesting. At some point, they started doing their like little debate review, which is really just Sondsol yelling at him a ton. At some point, I joined. I got dragged in, because Panda and Sondsol were yelling when I clicked on the stream.
Yes or no? If
They were yelling about quantitative easing and payments Janet Yellen had received after she left the Federal Reserve. She was, I guess, speaking at a few different places, at a few different like banks, and they were giving her in total, I think, $7 million for the speaking fees. Anyway, the point I want to bring up is eventually I got dragged in. Interest rate
Corrupt 3 layers away from Nonfon.
for Panda. Okay, it's going pretty good. I just have a question for Panda. Okay, I'm just super curious.
I don't care.
Do you know what the loanable funds market is, buddy?
The loanable funds market.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. Actually, don't know what that specific thing is.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so here's something interesting, by the way. Just so you know, the actual point of quantitative easing is that it shifts the loanable funds market to the right. It shifts the supply of loanable funds market, which is basically the money that can be lent out in the economy, to the right. Okay. Do you have any idea what that would do to the interest rate?
Would that increase the interest rate?
That would decrease the interest rate because she should be banned from the economy. Why do you hate Janet Yellen so much? What has Janet Yellen done to you, bro? Haven't you seen the photo of her in and out? Janet Yellen. In and out. Janet Yellen's in and out order revealed. Such a funny photo. Janet Yellen order in and out. Heading to the airport to meet Xi Jinping. She ordered like a burger and fries, but we don't know. To this day, we don't know if she got the fries animal style or not. An exclusive report her meal was a cheeseburger with fries and onions. The Treasury Department didn't respond to a follow-up email seeking clarification about whether the fries had onions on them or if the onions were on the burger or if anything was animal style. She's a Democrat economist, which basically means a taxpayer terrorist.